Class, we're now into week 8, and we want to go through a review of the course, hitting the high points, and so we get a deeper understanding of what the course information was trying to relay and communicate to you. And so this would be your final lecture process, and there will be a quiz, kind of like a final quiz to review and solidify some of the key thoughts of the course. So let's get into week 1, when we talked about the research articles primarily. And what I wanted you all to understand was that in nutrition, information changes very rapidly. The new technology, the ability to sift through data, the new concepts and theories. And so it's important that you don't sit back and rely on information that's greater than 5 years old. You also have a lot of personality and marketing in the nutrition arena. And so when you research information or when you base some of your perceptions and thoughts on the information, you want to make sure that your source for the information is a valid and unbiased, impartial source. It's very difficult to do with all the research dollars flooded about through private corporations and endorsement of personality, but you do want to look at, again, not blogs, not commercial sites, but you rather want to focus on the .govs and the .edus. Those are better, and then you also want to have individuals that have some credentialing on what they're talking about. They're not just sitting back and relying on personal experiences. Okay, so when you look at the information, you want to make sure that it's not coming from articles that have bias, are part of an advertising for a product, and the author does not have the credentialing. Okay, when you also look at the nutrition information, your eating routine or dietary goals should solidify one of these 3 aspects. Hopefully, your eating plan can give you multiple, if not all 3, but you definitely want to be eating a menu that's going to allow you to improve one of these 3 core pillars. Call it lifespan, which is decreasing your risk factors of death. That's about the best you can do. We can't guarantee you living to a certain age, but what we can do is reduce the types of morbidities that can reduce your lifespan. And so you want to have a diet plan, for example, that can help you reduce your risk for stroke, reduce your risk for diabetes, reduce your risk of high blood pressure, improve your immune system function. These kinds of things, okay? Because over time, these things should work together to increase total overall lifespan. Secondly, you also want to have a diet platform that allows you the energy and the expression of recovery from your day. That's your health span. And so you want to have a diet that's rich in the B vitamins, rich in minerals, rich in the essential amino acids. And so you feel good and not just living a long time in pain and debilitation, but you want to also feel good. And then lastly, you want to have an eating platform that allows you to look as good as you can. So your skin quality, hair quality, fingernail, toenail quality allow you to have the optimal weight and body fat levels. And so your diet plan should incorporate at least one, if not all 3 of these goals to truly be a healthy eating plan. We then studied some of the longer lived populations on the earth, which are called blue zones. Now again, right now the human maximal lifespan is about 125 so far that can be validated. But the global average human lifespan somewhere close to 80. And so you can look at here now the American ethnicities, the white, black, Hispanic, and Asian, and we see the average lifespans, and then you want to look at some of these eating characteristics versus the longer-lived cultures that are nearing your 90s, high 80s. And so basically, when you consume a diet that's optimized, you're basically increasing your chances of getting to the high 80s. So you're adding 7, 8, 9 years to the average lifespan. Now, if you start to smoke and drink, then you're decreasing lifespan. And that's when we get into the chronic diseases. And so for our purposes, we want to optimize our longevity, trying to get into the high 80s, low 90s. And that diet's going to be full of vegetables, fruits, nuts, seeds, whole grains, beans, and have limited amounts of meat and dairy products. That's basically what it looks like. We also looked at some of these populations, and so we know that these longer-lived societies are shorter in stature, they're lighter in weight, and so you're not going to be 300 pounds getting to these high um, ages. You're also going to have a diet that's activity and low stress, and so sleep habits are important. Overall, occupations are important. Having support, having family, cohesiveness, these things all work together to support a longevity design. Okay? They're outdoorsy, they're active, they're thin, they're smaller, and they're consuming basically a plant-centered eating style. In week 3, we're moving into trying to decide the concentrations of both calories and then what types of foods we should be looking at. And so a quick and easy formula to remember to calculate calories, just to give you a ballpark on how much food, again, not necessarily to each calorie we have to be that mindful of, but just to give you a global parameter of how much food we need to consume, we take our height, convert it to inches. You take the gender factor. For guys, it's 2.5. For females, it's 1.85. Multiply that by between 10 to 12. I'm just using 11 there. And I'm getting these numbers from a total caloric energy requirement per day. So then that kind of gives you a guideline. Then from there, we want to make sure that we include these essential food macronutrients, which are the carbohydrates, proteins, and fats. But the carbohydrates themselves are not something that you have to eat a certain amount of. So that is your most varied macronutrient. There is no actual requirement to consume carbohydrates. There is, however, for proteins and fats. And so we want to make sure that we eat healthy fats and we have high quality protein, which is probably the most significant cost to your food budget. So when we looked at then the overall calories, the overall amount of those calories you should be consuming, about 25 to 35% fat. To calculate your protein, you take your height, you divide it by 2.2, and then you multiply that times a 0.8 to 2.4 factor to get your grams of protein per day. Okay? So that calculates that. So now when we look at the deficiencies, the types of food that individuals are not eating, and then the nutrients that they're not getting because they're not eating those foods, you can see here that some of these sources of the key sources, now there are other sources for these nutrients, but these are the most significant dietary sources. So there's eggs, fatty fish, that is beef liver there. Beef liver again, eggs, dairy products, some animal products, and then dark green leaves. Again, you want to look at these symptoms. A lot of people associate age with decline, where really you have nutrition deficiency is your issue, not necessarily because you're getting older. And so you can look at these slides and look at some of these key nutrients and how low the population is not getting these foods, what these foods do, and the nutrients that these foods contain. And so if you can see here, leaves and seeds and liver keep popping up, and you can look at these foods, nutrient values that we just don't seem to get in our population. And it's not happenstance that these nutrients, the lack of these nutrients, then lead to the arise of symptoms, which then leads to the genesis of some chronic disease. And so then here you go again with more deficiencies. And so there's a lot of nutritional deficiency, and that dovetails back into the American both lifespan decline and health span decline. So not only is the American population dying 7 to 10 years earlier than optimal longevity, they also are having a huge chronic disease burden. And so you're only healthy of your life maybe half to a third before you have all these symptoms in your low 40s. You start having blood pressure and weight gain and all kinds of symptoms, and then that leads to a chronic disease in your 50s, and now you have a shortened lifespan, dying in the 60s and 70s. And so when you look at these deficiencies of symptoms, how many of these key food groups supply where these nutrients are that we're deficient at? And you can look at the leaves are a huge supply of our nutritional deficiencies, and American population does not eat a lot of leaves or nuts or seeds, beans, liver. You see, so we're just not getting these essential foods on a daily basis, and over time, this definitely erodes our lifespan. And so I'm using these terms, but we need to also define these terms. And so we know lifespan, that is your maximal longevity, when you're physically able to engage. How long are you here on the planet? Secondly, you have the health span. When are you at your peak capacity? When can you do things? When are you socially most active? When are you engaged and involved? And we all had grandparents or older family relatives that were alive, but really not participating in a lot of these functions. Some of your older family friends and that kind of thing. And it's very disappointing when you might have friends or older friends' parents, and you go visit, you come home from school, or you see them around, and they're not how you remember them as you were growing up, right? That old sport coach that maybe have helped you along, or that old teacher that now it's gotten, they're not dead, but their personality now starts to change, and then their engagement around their environment has been altered, and that is your health span. And so you want to make sure that you can remain engaged and important to the network of people that you want to be around and both you support as long as you age. And then lastly, hey, if you're going to live a long time and feel good, why not look good? And so you also want to make sure that you're attractive. Again, attractiveness is insignificant, helps you maintain a high quality of life, high self-esteem, and it definitely allows you to enjoy more of your environment. So we don't have to minimize these three particular categories, and you can have a diet plan that focuses on one, two, or all three of these. So as we move through these three significant perspectives, we now want to focus on the first one, which is the longevity. And we can see here that some of these root causes, when we see these adjectives of cancer, heart disease, diabetes, liver disease, those are just adjectives to describe what has happened, how your body has responded to the different lifestyle, your engagement with alcohol and drugs, your diet, your healthcare process, right? We're just talking about adjectives. It's not like, hey, this is a noun and you are cancer or you are heart disease or you may be diabetic. It doesn't mean that you have to own that condition. You can get out of that, right? You didn't wake up with it. You earn that through your lifestyle, through how you manage stress, through how you eat, how you engage your environment. And so if you change those practices, you can change your adjective. If you do not change these practices, you will not change the adjective. It's just that simple. You could say, hey, this man is walking. Doesn't mean the man can't jog or the man can't run or the man can't drive, right? It's available. But if you don't change your behavior, you're just known as the walking man. And so it's just that simple with these different diseases. People get all bent out of shape because they get labeled. But if you change how you engage the people, the environment, and your particular daily routines, you can very deeply modulate, if not altogether change your situation. So that was, as we looked at the longevity component, really looking at how we change behaviors to intensify our renewal systems and prevent disease. Now we look at the health span. And health span, aging is a function of organ damage. And we look at these metabolically active organs, the heart, the kidneys, the liver, muscle, brain. These organs, excuse me, metabolize a lot of energy per day. And if those energy requirements do not get met, then those organs will not work optimally and change how you manage your vitality. If your liver starts to get compromised, if your muscle starts to atrophy, then you start to gain weight, and then you change how you burn the calories. Now your vitality level goes down, and now you're at risk for different disease states because of that. The key is to prevent that by maintaining optimal organ function. And so, how do you do that? Well, you have to sleep, and so you can regenerate the damage that the day puts on the body, as well as giving your body the proper nutrients that it can use to repair it and detoxify itself. And then lastly, you want to decrease the exposure to harmful things such as cigarette smoke, alcohol, pollution, massive amounts of calories at a time. So like binge drinking, binge eating, right? All that energy at one time destroys your ability to process calories in the cell, so that ages you. And so having 3 meals a day, 2 or 3 meals a day, uh, making sure that we are sleeping, making sure that we are managing the toxic burden of alcohol, not being around cigarette smoke. These things allow us to age in a more helpful manner. And then lastly, we looked at the attractiveness. And so we all can recognize somebody who's attractive, but attractiveness has very objective measures to it. And you can make yourself optimally attractive, right? People do it through surgery, people do it through exercise, people do it through diet, but there are very good measures around this. And so what I'm showing you on this slide are some of the key measures. So you can measure yourself, and you can put together a plan, a dietary plan, and an exercise plan, and a lifestyle routine that allows you to be more attractive, if that is so your desire. But these are some of the measurements of the ranges of moving between optimally attractive and out of the range into a disease risk zone. And so some of the general guidelines around improving your lifespan, that no matter what you eat, you can eat a diet that's got a lot of fat in it, a lot of protein in it, a lot of carbohydrates in it. Your diet has to meet your requirements for your nutrients per day. There's no point in taking in calories if you're not taking in the nutrients to properly metabolize and repair the body. Secondly, you have to limit the alcohol, right? You have to limit the damage. No matter what plan you're on, if you're drinking and smoking, doing recreational drugs, how long are you going to live? How good are you going to feel? And how well are you going to look? There's no long-term alcoholic drug user processed food consumer that is looking and feeling optimally. So we know that. And so you have to limit those things, if not restrict them entirely, to optimize those three aspects. And then within, after you do kind of those big three things of limiting the processed food, alcohol, cigarettes, having a diet that meets your vitamins and mineral requirements, then depending on how long you want to live, you either want to limit your animal products, you want to make sure you have low sugar, high fiber foods, and you want to make sure you have a proper omega-3 uh, ratio to help you look, feel, and live as long as possible. So then we looked at week 4, which was kind of breaking down and defining these carbohydrates, these proteins and fats into a little deeper dimension here. And so we know that carbohydrates, like all macronutrients, are comprised of a couple of key elements, carbon, hydrogen, oxygen. Every macronutrient has carbon-based, carbon, hydrogen, oxygen-based. And then how that's structured is that it can either be a simple carbohydrate where you can break those bonds for energy really easily, or they can be complex and it can take a variety of chemical equations to separate the energy from each other. Carbohydrates are also sugars, and a group of sugars are called starches. So it depends on how many of these sugars are all linked together and how tightly they're bound to describe them as simple or complex. Right? The simple unit of a carbohydrate is a saccharide, 1 unit of the sugar molecule. We also looked at the proteins, and again, proteins are amino acids bunched all together, just like the carbohydrates had the simple sugars called saccharides. The proteins have the amino acids. Those are the simple forms of the links of protein. And again, they're made up of carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and an additional potential molecule called nitrogen, and then some even have another one called sulfur. And so the differences between those proteins and carbohydrates from the element standpoint is that you're adding nitrogen and, in some aspects, sulfur to the carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. There are, like the carbohydrates, they had two forms of carbohydrates. They had simple and complex. In proteins, they have what's called essential proteins and non-essential proteins. Those are proteins that you cannot manufacture and you have to eat in the diet. And those proteins have to come from either animal tissue or the combination of certain plant-based foods together. And you recognize a lot of these plant-based foods like beans and rice, peanut butter and bread, beans. So these things are kind of some of the foods that we take traditionally together will help you meet your essential amounts, even though you may not eat animal tissue. And then you also have, again, that describes the amount of essential or non-essential amino acids. Those are either called complete or incomplete protein sources. So the complete sources are the animal sources, which all have what's called the essential proteins. The incomplete sources of protein are primarily plant-based, and so those are the non-essential sources. And protein, unlike carbohydrates, there is a nutritional requirement and it must be consumed. Without enough protein, you will run into some deficiency disease states. The next one we have is fats. And fats, just like the carbohydrates, has the 3 molecules of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. Of course, they are arranged differently. And then there are 4 types of fatty acid structures, and those are called polyunsaturated fats, saturated fats, trans fats, and monounsaturated fats. Okay? There are, again, just like in the proteins and carbs, these fatty acid structures can be broken down into smaller aspects, and those are called lipids and triglyceride. So you can have that triglyceride is comprised of that glycerol head and the lipid legs. And so again, you think of a traditional fat, it's got the three glycerol heads at the top, and then it has the three lipid tails that are attached to the glycerol head. Next, you have the, again, types of fat. You have the essential, the linoleic, those are the omega-6, and then you have the linoleic, and that's the omega-3s. So, but you can eat fats both from animal sources and plant-based sources. Okay? And then the last component is fiber. Fiber is a type of complex carbohydrate, again, and it is conditionally essential in the diet. How much of it is not necessarily determined. There's an optimal amount that you try to shoot for. However, they project it somewhere between 15 grams per 1,000 calories of energy that you consume. And so there are the two types of fiber, the soluble fiber and the insoluble fiber. And so the soluble fiber is kind of forms like maybe like the end of a brush. It kind of helps scrub the edges of the intestinal tract, is to help move out some of the wasted bacteria and food particles that are collected against the sides of the intestinal tract. Then the insoluble fiber is more like the stalks and skins of the fruit. So think of like the celery or the broccoli stalk is insoluble, and the soluble fibers is more like the broccoli florets or the white part of the apple or pear. Those are pectin. These things help scrub the edges and helps clean, if you will, the digestive tract. Okay, it can kind of swells up with water intake, and then it works with the insoluble like a log that just gets pushed through and helps push everything in front of it out. So that's kind of how you can think about it from a fiber standpoint. And so this gives you a summary of week 1 through week 4A of the course, some of the major themes, and then we want to look at then week 4B up through week 7 for the second component of the course. All right, thank you very much.